because the motion trail has everything, right? So you cannot just look at one thing. So that's a weird thing that can come up with the motion trail. This happens a lot in this assignment, is because the filters. What people don't realize is they have the points selected and not their character rig, right? Not the ball, right? So the ball, if I click on it, it behaves fine. I can go isolate whatever I want and work on it. But if I have the trail selected, I can't just isolate one curve. It'll always go back to showing everything. Okay. So the way to protect yourself from that is to make sure you turn off all the filters except for this one. That way, when I'm dragging a box around here, I'm only selecting the rig. I can't select the motion trail. There's no way I can grab the points anymore. Now, the nice thing is once I have a pattern, then all I have to do for the other bounces is go here, break the tangents, and then roll them up. And watch out for puckering, right? I don't want to pucker the curve so it kind of breaks. But this will help get a nice sharp bounce, right? It will change the object's direction really quickly. So I go from bounce to bounce just to see what that looks like. Boing, boing, boing. And I have to go in there, update the curve. Boing, boing, boing. And for the translate X, which is going left to right, all I have to do is just put everything back on a straight line. Just going to hit delete so that everything, oh, not the whole curve. There you go. Delete that. And then everywhere I see a red tick mark, I'm just going to hit S, put those points back on a nice straight line. That just evens everything out. Looking at this, I'm a little worried about this bounce over here. I think the up and down, yeah, it's hard to notice, but this curve on this side, it's a little bit puckered. I kind of pushed it a bit too high, right? So it's kind of got a little bit of a kink in the curve. So I'm just going to move that down, tap that. That looks better. That looks more like a nice parabola. And the reason for the straight line, right, is so that when I'm halfway at the high point, I'm also halfway this way. So going across the screen, it's just making sure I'm exactly halfway. The high point is exactly halfway between this landing and that landing, which is what a parabola is. Right. So if I had a parabola that was like this, right, I would know that, oh, it's kind of skewed, right? So by taking this point, deleting it, and then making sure it's a straight line, I'm just letting the computer divide everything up into half for me. So it's just nice and evenly spaced, just to get that for free. Okay. Now the squash and stretch. Let's look at the formula here. I've got two drawings here that show the squash and stretch positions. So the real question is where do you stick in the squash and stretch? How do I cram that into what I already have? And the idea here is what I'm going to do, let me just kind of make this a little bit bigger, and I'm going to use my little grease pencil here, is I'm going to add some new positions. So if I look at frame 11, I've got a pose, and 13, I got a pose. So frame 12 is open. I don't have a key there, so it's available. So over here, I'm at this position, and then I'm over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one and I'm going to turn it into a stretch. Oops. There we go. So I'm going to draw a stretch pose here. Right there. And then this one, I'm going to put in a squash. I'm going to go right here. At this point, I want that to be a circle. It's frame 12. I want that to be a stretch pose. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have the ball hitting the ground, but it's going to be stretched. So what I'll do is I'll go to 13. I already have a pose where it's on the ground, and I'm just going to copy that. I'm just going to copy that position to frame 12. There. So now I got two frames where it's on the ground, right? That's all that I've done. Now it's on the ground. And then frame 12, I'm going to create a stretch pose. And like I mentioned, the problem is with the stretch control is that the angle, right? If I want to change that, I have to make sure that I angle this using this control here. So this is to sort of angle the rotation, right? So I want to make sure that I'm pointing the deformers in the direction that I was coming from. Okay. And then 13, I want to do a squash. Again, I'll just zero everything out here. Get rid of the rotation. And put that squash back to being a circle. There. Now, the problem with using these squash and stretch controls is I have not keyed them anywhere else. So the ball is going to start to morph, right? Frame 1, it's a circle. And then at frame 12, it's stretched. So it's going to do all this stretching, right? I didn't ask it to. So it's going to ruin all the squash and stretch. So what I have to do at 13, at sort of 11, is I need to make sure that this thing is back to being a circle. So I have to protect the shape of everything, get rid of any rotations, put it back to just being a circle. So now it's going to stay a circle from 1 all the way to 11. And then only at 12 is it going to change shape. And you can see after 13, because I haven't changed it, it's going to stay squashed, right? So it's like it's been permanently changed. I have the same problem. By 15, I have to make sure that all this stuff gets zeroed back. So it's going to be a sphere again. Okay, so frame 11 is still a circle. Frame 12, I created a pose on the ground, just like 13. And then I just pulled the stretch control and rotated the stretch control just so it lines up in the direction I'm going. Okay, and then to bounce out, again, the same idea. What I'll do is I will copy 13. What did I do? Oops, undo. Copy and paste that to 14. And then I'm just going to stretch the ball, but now go that way. So what happens is I get a stretch, a squash, and then 14 over here would be a stretch pose. Circle, stretch, squash, stretch, circle. And that creates a pretty nice illusion of flexibility. Too much, and it will draw a lot of attention to itself, right? So it's just about making sure that it connects. A lot of books, you'll see the stretches in the air. Other books, it's on the ground. They're just formulas. You just try something and see that it works. So that pattern that we're trying to get is that this moment when we hit the ground, we want to change that from being a circle to being a squash. So we get like one position where it's squashed. The frame before, we do a stretch. The frame before that, it's still a circle. And that's the part that can really throw people off, is because if you forget to keep this thing a circle, it's just going to drift from frame 1. It's going to start to elongate or squash. So you have to control that. You have to go put in a key and make sure that the squash and stretch controls aren't just drifting, right? So the pattern is at 11, it's still a circle. 12, we do a stretch pose, and I put that on the ground. 13, we do a squash pose. 14, we do a stretch pose to get out of that squash. And then 15, we're back to being a circle. Since we're going to have exactly the same pattern, I can copy and paste that. So I could go and see, well, where do I need this pattern again? Right over here, I'm going to copy that. I'll go over here to this bounce and say, well, okay, how about I do that? What if I copy and paste that pattern right here? So it's a circle, it's stretched, it's squashed, it's stretched, and it's a circle again. That gives me something close. Now all I have to do is worry about, okay, now the height of this. I have to make sure that this thing, I have to save its height, and then I have to do like I did over here. And you can see that Maya does some pretty ugly stuff with the curves. When you copy and paste, you get all these weird little bumps. And to fix this, usually what I'll do is I'll just go into this point and I'll just go to one side and say, make that a straight line, make that one flat, go over here, make that one flat, so that it's going to actually lock to the ground. whenever you copy and paste keys, the graph editor becomes a big kind of tangled mess. It's just like a bunch of pasta being thrown all over. So even over here, when I copied and pasted these controls, they look okay. Looks like that's all right. Again, I'm only using this one, but the up and down, that's what I need to really pay attention to. Is you can see that this stretch, it should be on the ground. So the problem is I need to get here. So I would copy that position and paste it. So I put that back on the ground. And again, you'll see I copied and pasted, and you can see it gave me this kind of a mess here. So I have to go back in here and just, okay, flatten that out, just to keep things more sanitary. I can still go back and adjust this point if I want. The last little piece of the puzzle, which is hopefully going to be the easiest, is to get the ball to roll as it goes through the scene. And that's this little red control at the equator, this one. And this is very easy to block in. You just go to frame 1 and key it, hit S. So I've got a key there. And then go to the very last frame that you need. And I think I had like, what was it, 38, something, 37, hit S. And I don't need anything in the middle, right, for this control. I just need 2 keys. And I'm going to start with a guess. My guess is I'm going to have this thing rotate a full spin. And I'll just sort of see what that looks like. I'm not going to get it perfect. You can see here, it's actually a negative rotation. So it's not positive, it's negative. So it's a negative 360. And this you do at the very end. Don't worry about doing the spin until you've done the bounce through space, then added the squash and stretch. Make sure the squash and stretch are controlled. Then doing the rotation is very straightforward. Frame 1, it's at 0. At the last frame of your scene, it's negative 360, so it turns the right way. And the ball is just going to spin through space, and it'll just work. We turn off the curves and turn off the motion trail. Then you can see the ball is spinning, right? Just with those 2 points. So the graph, again, it's doing smooth curves. There's no need for that for the rotation. I would just keep it a straight line so that the speed of the rotation is always the same. I don't want it to feel like it speeds up in the middle and then slows down at the beginning and the end. So you just make sure it's a straight line. And that's all that you need is to do a convincing spin, right? Just 2 points, just first frame, last frame, 0 and negative 360 for this ball. And that will just take care of the spin. The other thing to remind everybody of is you have the reference. So if you go look in week 2, the bouncing ball, we have in the example, right? Here is the squash and stretch, right? With 2 frames, here's one without. You can have a look at the example and sort of track that frame by frame to see how we did the different patterns, the squash and the stretch, what the rotation looks like, just to try and match it, okay? So this is a demo I was doing in mid-class when I was doing a play blast. Oh, is it gonna work? Nope, it broke. Just to show people how it feels when you stick to the ground for 2 frames versus 1 frame. So you can look at sort of the little differences there. And there's also the demo here. This is the play blast. Okay. One last little note about play blasting your scene for final submission. Make sure, turn everything off, turn off the grid, don't need that, and then turn on polygons. That's all that you need. And then when you go submit the file or to play blast it, again, go double check the options. Make sure 1280 by 720, go double check all the settings on Moodle, naming convention, etc. And then you can play blast it. If you want the play blast to look a little bit nicer, I mentioned that in the PDF for the assignment, it talks about the viewport settings. The renderer is this viewport 2.0. And this is something you would only do when you're ready to do a play blast. If you look at the edge of the sphere, look someplace where it's high contrast, and you can see those little staircase anti-aliasing that happens when you have pixels, right? We have a bunch of square pixels. It's very low level of detail. There's an option in here for anti-aliasing, which will make the ball look a little smoother. Just have a look at that when I uncheck it. Can people see the difference where now it's a little bit more jagged, a little bit more like a staircase? Is that possible to see? No? No one believes me? There.
Yes, but can you repeat how did you get there?
Oh, sure. That's
Okay.
under Renderer, Viewport 2.0. Go to the options,
Okay.
and that's this. And you just go to the anti-aliasing, and you turn on this. And this will just make this look a little bit smoother, a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer for export. Won't be so jagged edged. But don't work with this on. This costs you performance, so it'll slow down your machine. It's just nice for Playblast, just to get you a nicer looking Playblast. All right. There's other things in here that I recommend you don't turn on. Don't turn on the motion blur. It will crash Maya really quickly. It's a very fun idea, but if you haven't saved your work, don't turn this on. Okay, I haven't saved my work the whole time. That's very dangerous. Increment and save. There we go. Make sure you save your work. Looking like 2 hours with not one save. So don't play around with the motion blur until you've saved your work. It's kind of cute, but don't turn on for Playblast. It's really hard to control. But the anti-aliasing, I recommend that just to get the quality to feel just a little bit better. Okay, just for final submission, just so it looks a little bit nicer.